Hey, and welcome to this free guitar lesson. I'm sure most of you watching this are familiar with the pentatonic scale to some degree, no pun intended, and are probably even aware of the 5 different positions of the pentatonic scale. If you're not familiar with those things, just stick around because you're about to advance your guitar playing significantly. Over the years, I've met many guitar students who've worked really hard at practicing the different positions of the pentatonic scale, sort of up and down and up and down, up and down. And good on you if you're one of those people that's put in that work. Now, I've found that a lot of electric guitarists, if anything, actually underestimate just how huge a role pentatonic scales play in top-notch electric guitar playing. As a result, there's sort of this stigma that pentatonic scales are basic, and once you learn pentatonic scales, you should move on to more advanced scales. Try to phase that thinking out if you've thought that way in the past. Yes, it's true. When you reach that high level of electric lead guitar playing, there are going to be some extra notes that you use in addition to the pentatonic scale notes. But no matter how advanced you get, I really think of the pentatonic scale as almost sort of like the protein of a really great guitar solo. Many great guitar solos in a variety of different genres are actually kind of like 85% pentatonics, with some extra notes carefully added on top of those bass pentatonic notes. If you can comfortably and fluidly play between the different pentatonic scale positions, listen carefully, because that's a little bit different than just being able to play up and down each individual pattern. Not only will you already sound pretty awesome just as a result of being able to do that, when you can comfortably move laterally between those positions, you are going to be primed to add in those extra notes, those non-pentatonic notes that we speak of, which I kind of really think of those types of notes as almost like the icing on the cake here. So today I'm going to give you 6 killer guitar licks to help you get there, to help you smoothly connect these patterns in a musical way. Of course, scales aren't the only part of the equation here, so I'm going to make each lick kind of focus on a different guitar technique to help you squeeze the juice of the scale and get the most dynamics and tone out of the mixing of these pentatonic scale patterns. Let's dive in. This first example is going to look at connecting the notes of the pentatonic scale using slides. This is a fun one, so let's check it out. To get this sequence going, I start on the 7th fret of the A string, picking the 7th fret of the A string, then getting the 5th fret of the D string, hammering on to the 7th fret of the D string, and sliding up to the 10th fret of the D string. Next, I'm going to pick 7 on the G string, hammer on to 9 on the G string, and slide up to 12 on the G string. I'm then going to pick 10 on the B string, and hammer on to the 13 on the B string, and slide up to the 15th fret of the B string. Then I'm going to pick 12 on the high E string, and hammer on to 15 on the high E string, and then I'm going to slide up to 17 on the high E string, and execute some vibrato there. This next example is going to bring some speed into the equation. This is going to be an explosive picking run that sounds really cool and is reminiscent of a lot of the 80s sort of hard rock type players. You know, Doug Aldrich, Randy Rhoads, like Gary Moore, those kinds of guys. It's going to use some economy picking to rapidly ascend through the positions of the minor pentatonic scale. Even if you don't play it as fast as I'm playing it here, it sounds really nice at a slower tempo too. So let's check it out. This idea is fast and takes some practice, but it's really effective and really smooth, and it's really fun to play once you get it down. The picking pattern that's going on is I'm doing 2 notes per string, and I'm starting with a downstroke on the high E, followed by an upstroke, and then another upstroke onto the next string, finishing with a downstroke. So essentially I have, and that's 8 and 5 on the high E, 8 and 5 on the B, and that's picked like down, up, down. And then it's just a matter of connecting all the shapes of the minor pentatonic scale using that idea. So I have 8 and 5 and 8 and 5. Then I move up and I have on the high E and B strings respectively 10 and 8 and 10 and 8. Then I have 12 and 10 and 13 and 10 on the high E and B strings respectively. And I usually actually do that with my middle and index fingers on the high E and my ring and index fingers on the B. Then I have 15 and 12 on the high E and 15 and 13 on the B respectively. 17 and 15, both on the high E and B strings. And now I've actually ascended an entire octave and I'm going to hit 20 and 17 on both those strings. And I cap it off with a little bend with a quick descending blues phrase just to finish things off. Next up, we're going to take a look at a couple of licks and ideas that use legato or hammer-ons and pull-offs to connect the positions of the pentatonic scale. This first one is going to be a really rapid 4-note ascending pattern that changes positions really, really quickly. So I'm starting on the 2nd fret of the G and I pick 2 there and hammer on a 5. Then I move up to the B string, pick 3 and hammer on a 5. Now you kind of have to start looking ahead to the next position, otherwise it's going to be really hard to move your hands in a way that your frets are accurate. You don't want to start hitting a bunch of random notes, it's just not going to sound good. So after 2 and 5 and 3 and 5 respectively, it's going to be on the G string 5 and 7 and then 5 and 8 on the B string. And that's just pick, hammer, pick, hammer. Sounds really cool when you work it up to speed. And it's just really just a matter of that trick of where when I finish this first pattern, somewhere by the time I'm looking at that B string, my eyes have started to drift to the next pattern. So I kind of I'm not flying blind and just moving my hand as fast as I can. Right around there, I'm already looking at the next position so that when my hand gets there, my eyes were already there. Next, I'm going to do 7 and 9 on the G and then 8 and 10 on the B. Then 9 and 12 on the G and 10 and 13 on the B. Finally, 12 and 14 on the G, 13 and 15 on the B. And some quick, fiery blues rock phrasing to finish off the idea. Next up, we have another hammer-on and pull-off style lick. And we're going to be using the hammer-on from nowhere technique, which is where you use a hammer-on to go on to a new string rather than picking the new string. It might seem a little bit unorthodox, but it's easier than it looks, and it really helps you keep things really fluid. It gives you a fluid, smooth sound, and it also saves you a bit of the laborious string crossing with your picking, which is a common sort of roadblock when it comes to building speed and crossing strings on the guitar. I'm starting by picking 2 on the G, hammering on to 5 on the G, and then pulling off back to 2. I'm basically using kind of like a hammer-on from nowhere to go down to the next string. If you want, you can pick the note, but it almost sounds kind of cool to just hammer on the notes. In other words, when I pick that next note, which is the 5th fret of the D string, I actually am not picking the note. I'm just going after the initial 2, 5, 2 on the G string. I'm just hammering straight on to 5 on the D string, and it's not as hard as it might look. Once you've got some decent strength in your left hand, it'd be no problem to do that. Then I'm going to pull off to 2 on the D string, and then hammer on back to 5. So I have the remainder of the patterns are the exact same. The only thing that changes is the left hand pattern and the position of the scale. So next up I have 5 on the G. I hammer on to 7 and pull off back to 7. Then I use the D string, I hammer on from nowhere to the 7, pull off to 5 on the D string, hammer on back to 7. So that's, I'm going to pick 7 on the G and hammer on to 9 and pull off back to 7. Hammer on from nowhere to 10 on the D, pull off to 7 on the D, and hammer on back to 10. So next I have 9 on the G, hammer on to 12 on the G, pull off back to 9 on the G, hammer on from nowhere to 12 on the D, pull off to 10 on the D, hammer on back to 12 on the D. Next I'm going to pick 12 on the G and hammer on to 14 on the G and then pull off back to 12. Hammer on from nowhere to 14 on the D, pull off to 12 on the D, hammer on back to 14 on the D. Another position shift, I'm going to pick 14 on the G, hammer on to 17 on the G, pull off to 14 on the G, hammer on to 14 on the D, pull off to 14 on the D, hammer on back to 17 on the D, and the last one is going to be 17 on the G, 19 on the G with a hammer on, pull off back to 17 on the G, hammer on from nowhere to 19 on the D, pull off to 17 on the D, hammer on back to 19 on the D. Next up, I'm going to give you a couple of string bending ideas that connect the pentatonic scale positions. This first bending example that I'm going to show you, we're going to really ascend up the neck and get a really explosive sound. It's going to conclude with a couple of quick bluesy notes just to show how some of these string bends might cap off. In this example, I start by bending the 7th fret of the 3rd string a whole step. And what I'm really doing is I'm bending up to the perfect 5th of the A minor pentatonic scale. Then I do a quick pivot down to the 5th fret of the 3rd string. And I do another whole step bend there. And essentially I'm bending up to the perfect 4th of the A minor pentatonic scale. The next bend is a big one. It's a 1.5 step bend on the 9th fret of the 3rd string. So you really got to crank that one to get that 1.5 steps. I'm then doing a quick little hammer-on sequence, which is the 7, 8, and 9 frets of the G string, picking 7, hammering on those 2, sliding up to the 12th fret, and then bending up to the root note. I continue adding a little bit of slides into this sequence, eventually bending up again to the perfect 5th. Then there's another 1.5 step bend where I bend up to I do the same 1.5 step bend we executed earlier, which is where I'm targeting the flat 7th of the A minor pentatonic scale, and that is a 1.5 step bend. And there's a quick little phrase to finish things off. This next string bending example is going to be moving more in a downward direction, down the neck. There is going to be a lot of sort of position shifts that we're using to move our hand before we execute a string bend. This is really important because when you're bending strings, you need to make sure that you're using enough fingers and that you have a good enough hand position so you get lots of power to your string bend, and which was what you need to get the right pitch. So with this, there's going to be some careful position shifts of the hand used in conjunction with some whole step and 1.5 step bends. It's going to cap off with a nice bluesy phrase to end things off. So let's check this one out. This is a great one to practice your string bending. I'm starting with a bend on the 20th fret of the B string, and I'm hitting the root note by doing so. Then I pick 17 on the B and then 20 on the B. And now I'm gonna bend, after that little hammer on, my left hand really pivots over. And the reason for that is I'm about to do a really big 1.5 step bend on the 17th fret of the B string, where I'm going to bend up to the flat 7th of the A minor pentatonic scale. So you have, and my 3 fingers, index, middle, and ring, all move over to do that, all so I can use all that power to push the string enough to get those 1.5 steps. Next, there's a little quick walk down the A blues scale, and I pivot again. I use 2 fingers on this. You could use 3 fingers if you like. It's just a whole step bend, not as drastic as the previous bend. I'm bending the 15th fret of the B to reach the perfect 5th of the A minor pentatonic scale. I then bend the 13th fret of the B. This is another whole step bend, and there I'm bending up to the perfect 4th of the scale. After that bend, I kind of pause for air there where I'm hitting the 10th fret of the B string. That's the root note, and it just sounds killer just to kind of hang on to that note for a while. Next, I'm going to do a 1.5 step bend on that 10th fret of the B string, and I'm bending from what is the root note on that 10th fret up to the flat 3rd of the A minor pentatonic scale. And there's a quick little walk down that A blues scale, and a quick little hammer-on pull-off combo, before ending on the flat third again. But that's a very nice aggressive sounding bend. It really takes a lot of strength, which is why I got those 3 fingers lined up to get those 1.5 steps. Great fun that one is. All right, so that'll do it for today's lesson. I hope this lesson got you thinking a bit about pentatonics in maybe a little bit of a different way, maybe showing you some cool sounds that you can get with just strictly this basic pentatonic scale. If you enjoyed this lesson, please consider liking this video, leaving us a nice comment, or even subscribing to the channel. Every little bit really helps as we build this thing. Thanks again for watching, and stay tuned for my next video coming to you really soon.